And I want to say right out front that I tend to use the word children, and I really mean people with autism and related disabilities. I tend to work with children. I do a lot of other thinking and helping people think about working with older students and adults. And I don't think there's really anything I'm going to say today that doesn't apply to people across the age span. And I will try to use that more age-inclusive language. I'm not very good at it. So I'm going to apologize in advance and try my best. And so I hope that those of you that work with folks who are older will take that into heart and try to help me generalize. So I do want to be clear about what my objectives are today. And I hope that we can get through these in a way that's both fun and hopefully somewhat informative. The main thing that I like to talk about when I'm talking about not just positive behavior interventions and supports, but really any time we work with people who have disabilities, is that the idea that our primary dependent variable, that is our goal of everything we do, is improved quality of life. So I kind of don't care if you have lovely data and people still can't, sit down and have a meal with their family. I don't care, what your statistics say if a child can't go to school in the place he or she and their family want them to go to school. So this issue of quality of life is my number one issue. The second thing is I want to talk about the concept of intensity, because especially in the autism community, we have this idea that hours are they're the coin of the realm. And so, we've gotten ourselves into this position where we think about hours rather than what happens during those hours. So I want us to try to think today about redefining this idea of intensity to really think about opportunities to respond. We have lots of people. I spent time at the University of Kansas. That's where I did my graduate work. And if it was college basketball season, I would be rock chalking, jayhawking for you. But since it hasn't really officially started, I will spare you that little embarrassment. But one of the things that we learned and we talked about a lot at the University of Kansas is this notion of opportunity to respond. And Vance Hall and his colleagues really are the folks who really introduced us to that field and kind of cemented that issue. But I think the way it really got its most biggest play is through some research that Betty Hart and Todd Risley did. In 1995, they published a book called Meaningful Differences. And what they did, and if you haven't read this book, and you can find great summaries of it, but it's a really interesting book. And what they did is they followed 42 children from birth through age 3, and they went into their homes every month and wrote down everything that they said, everything that was said to them. And what they found, because they had 3 groups that were different on social class, and what they found at the end of 3 years is that the children in the higher social class families heard more words and said more words. The children in the lower class families heard fewer words, said fewer words. Important. What was really interesting and important is that then they found that the children, the size of vocabulary at age 3 predicted academic achievement at age 9. So this issue of the opportunity to respond, the opportunity to have people talking to you and be able to talk back, we don't talk about that so much with children with autism, but we need to think about that. Their research has really prompted this whole movement around the world around this idea of a 30 million word gap, that there's a 30 million word gap between what high SES families, kids in high SES families and kids in low SES families hear. So the size of their vocabularies are smaller when they start school. Well, then think about that for kids with disabilities. They hear even fewer words. So this idea of opportunity to respond. The third thing I really want to talk about is this idea of embedding explicit instruction. so that we separate. Right now, often in instruction, we separate this idea of this is where we teach, but then this is where we live. And in reality, we need to merge those, because it's great if I can do a whole bunch of skills in a clinic room. That's fabulous. It makes my clinician feel good, but it doesn't really do anything for me. So this idea of making sure that we bridge that gap. And then finally, I want us to go back to focus a little bit on instructional strategies, because it's always about the instruction. I tell my students every day that student failure is instructional failure. If a child is not doing what we want them to do, if a student is not doing what we want them to do, then we haven't taught them the right way. So that means we have to go back and really examine our basics and say, this didn't work. What did we do wrong? We have to figure something else out. So with that, I'm going to hopefully take you on a little discussion for the next hour and a half, and we'll see where we end up. So let's think about what meaningful outcomes are. I think they're kind of, sometimes they're hard to define, and they're kind of like we'll know them when we see them. So we can all agree that this is an example of a meaningful outcome, that these three little people seem to be happily involved in a friendship, and the fact that they have different abilities and backgrounds doesn't seem to be impacting their friendship at all. That to me is a meaningful outcome. And here's another example. You can see that this little girl is writing, "I love school. It's the best. I like math. It is the best. I love room 5." So wouldn't we want every one of our students to come home from school and write a note like that, or tell their parents that I love school, as opposed to what I hear from many, especially adolescents with autism, who develop school phobia, and we get called because their parents are unable to get the children on the bus to get them to go to school. To me, this is a meaningful outcome.